Do you believe in Bigfoot? What if I told you a woman once claimed Bigfoot saved her life? In 1987, deep in Montana's Bitterroot Mountains, Grace Kettering, a forest ranger grieving the loss of her husband, fell from a cliff during a routine patrol. Just as the rope snapped and she plummeted into the misty ravine, a massive, fur-covered hand caught her. It didn't kill. It didn't roar. It simply held her and vanished. She woke in a cave, wrapped in dry moss. Outside stood a creature nearly 9 feet tall, eyes dark and ancient, filled not with rage, but sorrow. This isn't just a ghost story. What you're about to see is based on Grace's real journal entries, backed by findings that conservationists tried to bury for decades. In this video, you'll uncover why this creature chose to save a human, not destroy her, the shocking truth behind a decades-old hunting operation, and a final encounter that will make you question everything you thought you knew about monsters. Grace lost everything. Yet years after, she still found footprints in the snow, leading up to her porch, and stopping, silent, watching. If you've ever thought Bigfoot was just a campfire tale, missing this story means you may never understand. Some beings don't need to be proven. They just need to be believed. And before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? I'd love to say hi to you personally. The sky still trembled with thunder, soft and far like a memory not ready to let go. The storm had passed in the night, but its breath lingered across the Bitterroot range, slicking pine trunks, leaving mist clinging low like smoke. Dawn came in streaks through the breaks in the clouds, a pale, bruised light falling on the forest floor, catching in the rivulets still streaming down stone. There was a hush in the woods, not silence, but the kind that waits. The hush after something violent has spoken, and before the world knows how to answer. Grace Kettering moved slowly along the muddy trail, the tip of her boot checking the edges where the slope had given way. She was in her late 30s, though the years felt heavier. Her face had the weathering of someone who'd learned to hold grief quiet behind the eyes. Wind brushed strands of damp brown hair across her cheek, and she tucked them back beneath the band of her ranger's cap. Her olive jacket was smeared with silt at the elbows, the knees of her corduroy pants dark with moisture. She moved like someone used to navigating danger, but not careless with it. Below her, the mountain fell away into a curtain of fog. Somewhere out there was the ravine, 60 feet down to twisted trees and wet stone. She couldn't see the bottom, only hear it. Water rushing somewhere, echoing up in strange, rhythmic gulps. Like breath, she clicked her old radio. Static. No voice. The antenna barely wobbled. Just broken chatter. She clipped it back onto her belt. Figures, she muttered. The landslide must have taken the repeater tower out. She leaned forward, hands resting on her thighs, peering at the snapped anchor line half buried in mud. The steel cable was frayed, the earth beneath it sheared and jagged. The cliff had split here last night, carved out by runoff, wind, and a summer that came too fast and too heavy. Her job was to assess the damage, mark it for the Forest Service, and then get out. She knelt down, fingers testing the tautness of the backup line still running along the rock face. Her glove brushed a deep gouge in the anchor. Lightning must have hit here. No wonder the storm had howled so hard in this corner of the range. She stood, unhooked her safety clip from her belt, and latched it to the secondary cable. It groaned softly as it bore her weight. Just a quick check, then she'd pull back. She eased herself along the ledge, one foot, then the other. Eyes sharp, every nerve tuned. Below her, the wind gathered again. That same hush. The kind that held something just out of sight. Then a crack. Not thunder, not stone. Just beneath her boots. Something gave. Her heels slid, struck loose gravel, and in an instant, the ledge caved. She gasped, tried to twist back, but too late. Her grip slipped. The line caught, then jerked, then screamed. Her body slammed hard into the cliffside. Pain bloomed in her shoulder. She dangled now, swinging over the void. One strap twisted, one arm clinging to the harness, the other reaching up in vain for the cable above. It groaned, threads parting, the stitching tearing louder than any scream she could have made. She didn't cry out. She just closed her eyes. For one long second, all she could hear was wind. Then something else. A sound so low it trembled through her ribs instead of her ears. Not a word, not human, not threat. Just resonance. Like the mountain breathing in. The rope gave. She dropped. The air vanished under her feet and the forest surged up to meet her. But she never hit the ground. A jolt. Her body snapped midair, spine curling like a whip. Something caught her, not the rope, a grip, solid, rough, alive. Her eyes flew open. A hand. Not a man's, not a bear's. Covered in thick brown-gray fur. Massive and trembling with effort. The fingers curled tight around the lower line that had snapped half free. Her harness tugged, swinging slightly, and she followed the line up. There, just above her, on a jutting ridge barely wide enough to stand, a figure crouched low. Half shadow, half sunlight. The storm mist curled around its outline. 8 feet tall, maybe more. Shoulders like boulders wrapped in winter moss. Chest heaving, eyes locked on hers. Ember. Not bright, not glowing like stories say. Just tired and old and full of something she couldn't name. She stared, breath stolen from her lungs, not by fear, but by the unthinkable weight of being seen. Then the figure leaned back, muscles shifting under the matted coat, and gently lowered her down. So slowly she barely felt the descent. She tried to speak, but her voice was trapped somewhere behind the pounding of her heart. Her boots touched rock, but her knees buckled. Darkness swept up the sides of her vision like tide water, and the last thing she saw before her body gave out was the creature's hand releasing the line, and those eyes still watching her. Not with hunger, with worry. The world went black, and the mountain exhaled. She didn't know how long she was unconscious. Time didn't feel linear in the place she woke. It was dry, warm. The storm had vanished, or maybe they were somewhere far from it. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the orange flicker of light bouncing off stone. Her body ached, her ankle throbbed, her skin smelled of dirt and pine. But she was alive. Her hand brushed something soft, not a blanket, moss, layers of it, dry and woven tight with grass. A bedding, not built by accident. Her eyes scanned the space. She was inside a hollow, not a den, not a cave. Something in between. The kind of place carved not just by water, but by intention. The walls were smooth in places, blackened in others. There were scattered bones of deer, some picked clean, some wrapped in old hide. A pile of roots in one corner, hollowed gourds, water skins, things no animal would think to use. She sat up slowly, biting back a gasp from her twisted ankle. A crude splint had been laid beside her, and a flat stone held bits of crushed leaf and a wooden bowl of water. The air was cold, but a small flame cracked gently in a pocket of stone across the space, tucked safely into a natural hearth. And then she saw him, or it. No, him. The figure sat at the edge of the firelight, almost blending with the wall, legs folded beneath a massive frame. He didn't move, but he wasn't asleep. His posture held the tension of someone waiting. His eyes were closed, but only barely. She didn't scream. Maybe because something in her remembered that grip. Not just strength, but intention. Mercy. Her fingers brushed the bowl. He opened his eyes. They met hers again, and for a moment, neither of them moved. He tilted his head slightly. Then, slowly, he reached forward and nudged a small leather pouch closer to her with the tips of his fingers. It sloshed. Water. Then, without sound, without gesture, he leaned back and vanished into the dark behind the flame. Gone. She sat there, breath frozen in her throat. unsure if it had happened at all. But the warmth in her fingers, the taste of water on her lips, the clean wrap on her ankle, none of it was a dream. She tried to stand, pain shooting through her leg, so she dropped again to her knees and crawled to the edge of the hollow. The light outside was thin, maybe late morning, maybe not even the same day. The forest was still, and somewhere, not far, she saw him moving. Slowly, not toward her, but away. He didn't hide. He didn't charge. He walked upright, hunched slightly, but balanced. And as he moved, he looked back only once, then lifted his arm and swept it in a slow arc, pointing along a deer path that curved through the trees and disappeared over the rise, the way out. She watched until the last glint of his fur vanished into the timber, then looked down at the prints he left behind, each one the size of a dinner plate, pressed deep into the earth like signatures written in silence. She didn't know what he was, only what he wasn't, and that was enough for now. The first thing she noticed was the warmth. Not the heat of fire, not the sharp sting of sun on skin, but something softer, like being wrapped in the breath of something alive. It came through layers of scent, earth, pine resin, dried moss, damp bark, and something deeper, faintly animal but clean. Grace didn't move right away. Her lashes fluttered once, then again, adjusting to the amber glow flickering along the curved walls of the cave. Her thoughts were mud, thick and dragging, but her body hurt just enough to convince her she hadn't died. The stone beneath her was surprisingly smooth, padded with a bed of dried leaves, woven grasses, and soft lengths of stripped tree bark. She blinked, fully awake now, the memory crashing back in fragments. Rope snap, the fall, the grip that shouldn't have existed, those amber eyes, then nothing. Her chest rose sharply, and she tried to sit, only to groan as pain flared from her right ankle. She pulled herself upright, using one hand against the stone. Her boot was still on, but the laces were loosened and the leather stained with dried sap and specks of moss. Her fingers found the swelling. No bone broken, twisted, bruised, bad, but not permanent. Her shirt was torn at the shoulder, dirt embedded along her jawline, but she was alive. And she wasn't alone. Across the cave, just inside the outer edge of the shadows, he sat again, knees pulled up loosely, hands resting on them, his massive frame blending with the rough rock behind him. He didn't move, just watched, not with threat, not even with curiosity, like he was making sure she could stand before he did anything else. Between them, placed gently near her foot, was a pouch. Rough leather, its seams stitched with sinew or fiber, still damp along the edges. Next to it, a small pile of fibrous roots, cut clean. Food, water. She reached for the pouch with slow fingers, lifted it to her lips. Cool, river clean. It touched the back of her throat like forgiveness. When she looked back up, he was still there. She opened her mouth, unsure what she planned to say. But the words died somewhere behind her teeth. There was no point. Language wasn't what they were using. And yet, she wasn't afraid. Her breath slowed. Her shoulders dropped. The pounding in her temples faded to a hum. She nodded. Just once. And he nodded back. No sound, no gesture beyond that small, deliberate motion. Then he rose. The shift was silent. One long arm extended to help balance as he moved toward the opening of the cave. Light shifted over his fur. Gray-brown, thick, streaked with patches of darker hair across the spine and shoulders. He walked like something carrying great weight, not physical, but remembered. Before stepping fully into the light, he turned, glanced back at her again, then disappeared down the slope. She sat there a long time after he left. The roots tasted bitter but clean. Her stomach accepted them without protest. She drank again, then wrapped her jacket tighter and pushed herself slowly to her feet, using a stick she'd found beside the bedding as a crude crutch. She limped to the cave's mouth. Outside, the day was pale and soft, the sky a blur of gray-blue. Pines towered along the ridge, their tips rocking gently in the morning wind. The storm had passed. The air smelled of cold rain and cedar. Mist hung in low ribbons across the slope below, moving like breath between the trees. She could hear water somewhere, real water now. Maybe a stream cutting through the hollow just beyond view. Then she saw him, not far ahead, just beyond a patch of huckleberry scrub. He stood halfway up a rise, not watching her directly, but glancing back every few paces. He moved with caution, as if giving her room, but also inviting her. Not a guide, not a captor. Something else. She tested her foot again, wincing, then started after him. The descent was slow. He never let her get too close, but never vanished entirely. The forest shifted as they moved, light rippling through branches, birds calling again now that the worst of the wind had passed. She could feel the press of history in these woods. Every step reminded her she wasn't the first to walk this path, but she might be the first to follow something like him willingly. He paused near a split in the trail, if it could even be called a trail, more a gap in the trees worn by memory than by boots. There, he stepped aside. Let her pass him. As she did, he lifted his arm and touched his chest once, then the trees behind him. Then he turned and vanished between the trunks. Not looking back, she stood alone again, the path ahead suddenly visible through the thinning mist. Not far now, maybe a mile. 2 at most. By the time she reached the edge of the ranger trail, her legs were trembling. She could see the marker, weathered wood nailed to a tall pine, and below it, the faint carving she'd left months ago. She turned once more, glancing back toward the shadowed timberline. But there was no sign of him, only the wind moving softly through the branches. And then she saw it, near the base of a tree, one she hadn't noticed before, her ranger badge. Cleaned. Placed carefully atop a flat stone. Next to it, a braid of grass, woven tight. 2 stems folded toward each other like twin arrows pointing to a single place. She knelt, breath catching, fingers tracing the edge of the metal. He had brought it back, or found it, or kept it until now. She didn't know what it meant. Not really. But she understood enough to feel the knot tighten in her chest. It wasn't a trophy. It was thanks. She didn't speak, just folded the braid and placed it in her breast pocket. Then picked up the badge and stared at it a moment longer before tucking it into the side of her bag. The trees creaked above her. A hawk called somewhere out across the ridge. And for a flicker of a second, she swore she felt eyes again, somewhere just beyond reach. Not watching her, witnessing. She made it back to the outpost by sundown. Her report was short, vague, twisted ankle, trail unstable. She mentioned the storm damage, the missing rope line, the section of cliff that needed marking. She didn't mention the grip, or the eyes, or the hand that saved her from dying alone in the mouth of the earth. They wouldn't believe it anyway. Later that night, as wind rolled over the roof and rain whispered again through the pines, she lay in her bunk, eyes wide, staring at the rafters. The badge sat on the table, catching the occasional flash of lightning through the window. She wasn't dreaming. Not anymore. And somewhere out in the hollow, beneath the ridgeline where mist still clung to stone, something was moving again. Not hunting, not hiding, just being. The world had felt smaller before she fell. Now it didn't. And that was what scared her most. Because deep down, past the logic and the training and the rules burned into her from years on the job, she knew this wasn't over. It had only just begun. By the end of that week, the forest had changed. Not in sound, not in shape, but in feeling. Like a secret had been whispered into the trees, and now everything was waiting for someone to say it out loud. Grace felt it in her chest, a pressure that never quite left her lungs. Even the radio chatter at the ranger station felt more hollow than usual, as if every voice was speaking half a beat off from reality. She sat across from Calder Voss, the station chief, In his office, where the walls were covered in dusty topo maps, and the sharp smell of old coffee lingered around the corners. Her ankle still bore a faint discoloration under the compression wrap, and her hands fidgeted with the rim of her tin mug, though the coffee inside had long since gone cold. "I'm not saying it was clear," she told him, voice even. "I'm just saying something was there. It wasn't a hallucination. I remember what I saw." Calder leaned back, creaking the chair against the wall. His face, lined, pocked from years of wind and sun, twitched in that way it always did when he was forcing patience. "You were dangling off a cliff," he said. "Probably concussed. Shock does strange things. I've seen guys crawl for 10 miles convinced they're following their dead dog. You get my meaning?" Grace didn't answer. He sighed, rubbed his temple, then added, "There's nothing in your report we can act on. No evidence, no prints, no photos. Just a feeling." She stood, slowly. Her body wasn't trembling, but her breath had that hollow echo like standing in an empty church. "You're right. There's no evidence." She walked out before he could say another word. That afternoon, Rory Maddock rolled up in his mud-splattered Bronco, boots thudding against the gravel like he owned the damn mountain. Grace watched him from the station's shaded porch, arms folded, half hoping he'd just be dropping off something and leave. But of course, he didn't. "Got something you might want to see," he said, flipping down the tailgate. She limped over, careful on her bad ankle. He pulled out a manila envelope, opened it, and fanned out 3 grainy photos on the truck bed. "Snapped 'em just past Bitterroot Creek," he said. "Infrared trail cam. Thought it was a bear at first, but..." The figure in the image was blurred, half obscured by branches, and clearly too tall, too upright. 9 feet if it was anything. Shoulders hunched, one arm mid-swing. Eyes glowing faint in the dark. Not red like flashback, not staged. Grace felt her throat go dry. "You think it's still out there?" he asked, voice low now, more curious than mocking. She didn't answer. He grinned anyway, that same hunting dog grin he'd always had. "Got some boys itching to track it. Couple say it's a freak, some want to sell the footage. Me? I say we put it down before it puts someone else down first. You know? Like cleaning out a bad tooth. Quick, simple. You don't even know what it is." "Don't need to. It ain't supposed to be here, whatever it is." Later that night, after the last truck engine faded into the trees and the porch light flickered once before dying for good, Grace stood at her window staring out toward the mountains. She knew exactly where the fall had happened. The ledge, the mist, the grip. It wasn't a memory she could shake even if she wanted to. She tried telling herself it was sympathy, an echo of something human in the way it looked at her. But it wasn't that simple. It had chosen not to let her die. That meant something. The next morning, she packed a small canvas satchel, knife, flare, water, and a single folded scrap of old canvas she'd used back when she worked rescue in Denali. Just enough to keep her steady. Just enough not to look like she was tracking something. She didn't take the official trail. The sky was overcast again. That same Montana gray that felt like wet wool pressing against your skin. She followed the ridge back to the rock shelf where the anchor line had failed. Her boot prints from days ago were gone, erased by wind and rain. But she knew the way. She didn't expect anything. Not really. She just needed to see it again. When she reached the overlook, her breath caught, not because of the fall, not even because of the memory, but because something was there. At the base of a narrow pine, tucked against the roots like an offering, was her old ranger pin. Cleaned, placed purposefully. Beside it, laid neatly, was a braid of grass, tighter than before. This one woven in a V shape. 2 arrows pressed together at the tips, like a symbol she'd seen somewhere long ago but couldn't place. No human would have left it like that. Not a hunter, not even a tracker. She picked up the badge, fingers brushing the cold metal. Her thumb ran over the worn engraving. Her other hand trembled, just a little, as she picked up the braid and slipped it into her coat. She turned slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. But the woods felt aware. That night her dreams came in waves, not full scenes, just fragments, wind through hollow trees, the scrape of claws on stone, a deep sound, like thunder but slower, like breath echoing through a canyon. She dreamed of falling again. But this time, she didn't stop. She fell into blackness until a hand, huge, warm, calloused, caught her wrist and pulled her back. She woke before her feet touched the ground, breathless. Then still, out in the dark, far past the reach of the cabin's floodlight, something cracked softly in the timber. Not like a branch breaking. More like footsteps. She didn't turn on the light. Didn't reach for the rifle. She sat at the table instead, pouring hot water over old grounds, letting the hiss fill the silence. The night pressed close around her windows. And somewhere out there, something was listening too. Not with fear, not with anger, just waiting. And she didn't know yet whether it was waiting for her, or for something worse. But either way, it was close. The forest had begun to breathe again. After weeks of storms and frost-wet air, summer finally pushed in with quiet insistence, filling the Bitterroot woods with sap and new light. Shoots of young fern curled out from the shaded floor like fingers unfurling in a dream. The creeks ran clearer, their rush no longer choked by melt but humming in rhythm, as if the land itself were remembering how to live. Grace felt it too. The ache in her ankle had dulled to something distant, no longer sharp, just a reminder. Her steps were more confident now, and each morning she returned to that same overlook near the broken ledge. Not out of duty, not even out of curiosity anymore, but something older, more rooted. She carried a small satchel now, nothing official. Inside, a tin flask of water, coarse salt wrapped in wax paper, and a strip of dry cotton cloth. She left them in the same place each time, just past the bramble ridge where the slope folded into the hollow. She never stayed long. She didn't expect anything in return. But the rhythm was quiet, grounding. Offer, walk away. That was it. Until one morning the offering was gone. All of it. In its place, on a low stump, were 3 smooth stones, not placed randomly. Laid in a line, dark, wet river rock, each one shaped nearly perfect, flattened, polished. She lifted one in her palm. Its surface was cool, ridged slightly as if worn by time, but not by nature. There were no creeks nearby strong enough to shape them like that. They had been carried, picked, offered. She ran her thumb over the middle stone and felt something flicker behind her ribs. He was still out there. The exchanges continued. Some days she left food, salted oats, jerky, clean berries. Other times, just water and cloth. Sometimes the stump was left bare. Other times, gifts were returned. River pebbles, pine cones without teeth, and once, a braid made not from grass, but from her own ribbon, the one she'd lost during the fall. She didn't know what any of it meant, but it meant something. That night, under a ceiling of silent stars, she sat on the porch of the outpost, her hands around a warm mug, and listened to the woods. She thought of all the things that lived out there, all the tracks she'd studied over the years, cougar, bear, elk, even the faint shuffle of coyotes. But nothing in the textbooks ever left braided ribbons. She couldn't sleep. Something pulled at her from behind her ribs. The next night, fog rolled in heavy and slow, coiling through the trees like smoke from a buried fire. Grace didn't wait for morning. She took her lamp and walked the ridge trail under the moon, its glow thin and broken behind the veil of mist. At the overlook, she paused. The stump was empty. Then a sound. Not close, not far. A weight in the mist. A figure standing just beyond the silver outlines of the trees. Not moving. Watching. She didn't raise the light. She didn't speak. He stood taller than she remembered. Shoulders hunched, not in threat, but in gravity. One arm lowered to his chest. Slowly, he pressed his hand there and bowed his head. Her breath caught. It was respectful, not like a salute. More like a memory being acknowledged. She didn't step forward, only mirrored the gesture, hand against heart, head dipped. When she looked up, he was already walking, not toward her. Away, she followed. He led her through brush and old trail, through timber so dense the night seemed stitched to the bark. His shape ahead of her, always just at the edge of what the lantern could catch. They moved in silence until the trees thinned and the air changed. Something burned in the scent now. Char. Old rust. They came to a clearing, no larger than a living room. The earth there was blackened, but not fresh. A long time ago, something had burned here. A tangle of dead underbrush, bone-dry limbs, twisted metal. Half a trap, maybe. Grace stepped closer and felt her boots crunch over a patch of soil that crumbled too soft, too red. She knelt. Her hand brushed the ground. The ash gave way to something sharper. A rusted hinge. A segment of cable, frayed and stiff. Her heart crawled. There had been a trap here. Maybe more. She looked up. Sentinel stood still, back half turned, but not leaving. His shoulders rose and fell with a breath that echoed in the base of her spine. Then her eyes caught movement, small and dull. Near the far end of the clearing, a few strands of coarse fur. Not his. Too fine, lighter in color. Shorter, near the edge of a snare jaw, still jammed, half open. She didn't ask, didn't need to. Something had died here. Something young. Her throat went dry. She reached out instinctively to brush away the fur, but the wire's edge nicked her palm. A sharp sting. Blood welled instantly. She hissed, pulled back, wrapping her scarf around her hand. Sentinel's breath shifted. She looked up, and for the first time, he stepped fully into the light. His eyes weren't the glowing kind people imagined. They were dull gold, shadowed by grief. Deep, wet. His chest rose again. Then he knelt beside her. One massive hand reached forward, paused, then lightly touched the dirt where she bled. Not the blood itself, the place. Then he sat back, hand over his own heart again. Grace didn't speak. She couldn't. They stayed there, two shadows in a ring of ash, surrounded by silence that had once been fire. When she finally stood, she did it slowly, as if rising from something sacred. She didn't try to follow when he turned and disappeared back into the trees. She walked home under a sky turning lavender with dawn. Her hand still throbbed, but the pain felt earned. The memory of that clearing followed her for days. She stopped reporting in, took unpaid time, said it was for rest, said she needed to hike. No one asked questions. She went back twice, left nothing, found nothing. But each time she paused by that rusted trap and pressed her hand over her heart. The way he did. She didn't know what they were building. A ritual, maybe. Or a boundary. A way to say, I remember. I won't forget. Whatever it was, it felt older than apology. More sacred than regret. It felt like mourning, but not hers alone. And that was the part that changed her. Because sometimes grief is shared by those who have no language, no name. Only memory, and the marks we leave behind. The summer had turned dry, too dry, the kind of heat that felt wrong in the bones, like the land itself was holding its breath. Dust hung over the Bitterroot trails like a veil that never settled. Creeks ran low, and the moss that once covered the north sides of trees had curled and cracked into flakes. The animals moved differently now, quieter, more desperate. Grace noticed it in the way the deer didn't freeze when spotted. They just vanished. But it wasn't just the weather that was off. There was a charge in the air that hadn't lifted since the foggy night at the burned clearing. Something had shifted. Something in the human world. She first heard about it over the radio mid-morning. Unit 4, be advised. Rory Maddock and Associates pulling permits. 3-day predator control operation. Target area, Bitterroot Southeast Basin. Predator control. Grace's stomach dropped. That was no elk cull. It wasn't about bear activity either, not this time. She set down her field kit, thumbed the call button, and asked for clarification. 4, repeat, they're setting traps? The static was slow to answer. Affirmative. Snares, footholds, even requesting tranquilizers. Says they got a tip on a dangerous animal, 9 foot upright. Calder approved it. She turned off the radio. Didn't speak. Didn't curse. Just sat there for a long moment, her fingers digging into the arms of the canvas chair until her knuckles burned. By late afternoon, the first snare lines went up. Grace kept her distance, but not far enough to be blind. She followed them in silence, watching from the ridge as Rory and 2 others worked with a kind of careless pride. Laying out cable, setting bait. One of them laughed when a hawk dove overhead and nearly clipped their heads. She could see Rory's shape moving between trees like a dog that had caught a scent. But it wasn't the creature he was chasing. It was his own need to be feared. She confronted Calder that night. "You're funding a bounty hunt." "It's not a bounty, it's precaution. You approved steel jaw traps in a forest full of wildlife. You call that precaution?" He didn't even look up from his desk. "People are scared, Grace. They've seen things. I've got reports. Maddox got photos. They don't know what they saw. Hell, I don't know what I saw, but it wasn't a threat." "Then it won't get caught." That was all he said. She stared at him for a long time, long enough that he finally looked up, and the fear in his eyes wasn't of her. It was of losing control. When she left the station, the sun was dying behind the peaks. The light bled into red-orange over the range like something injured. That night, wind picked up over the basin, a dry gust, harsh and hot. It kicked dust through the valleys and tossed pine needles down like brittle rain. Somewhere deep in the trees, the forest held still. Then the scream came. It wasn't human, but it wasn't fully animal either. It echoed in waves, pain layered over panic, each note raw and tearing through the air. Grace shot upright from her cot before her boots even hit the floor. By the time she reached the basin ridge, moonlight had cracked through the haze and cast long, pale shadows down the slope. The trap line was broken in places. The tall grass bent in wide swaths like something massive had charged through. She followed the sound, blood pulsing in her ears. The crying was different now, closer. When she found the snare, the animal inside it wasn't what she feared. It was a bear, young, cinnamon-coated, one back leg caught in a coiled steel trap. The teeth had closed deep, blood pooling beneath the twisted limb, eyes wild with pain. But it wasn't the bear she stared at first. It was the shape behind it, Sentinel. He stood, half-crouched, hands low, body tense. Not with aggression, but with purpose. He was trying to figure it out, how to release it, how to keep it from thrashing itself deeper into the wound. Grace stepped into the clearing, slowly, deliberately. The bear turned toward her and let out another guttural roar, but it didn't lunge. Sentinel didn't run. He turned his head just enough to see her. Not startled, not afraid, just watching. She didn't speak. She reached down, picked up a thick stone from the ground, and hurled it into the trees behind them, hard. A clatter exploded in the brush, echoing off trunks. A second later, voices, shouting. Flashlights, coming fast. She looked back at him, then at the bear. She mouthed one word, "Go!" He didn't understand it the way humans did, but he understood her eyes. Still, he didn't run. He reached forward, planted one massive foot on the base of the snare, and with both arms pulled hard on the steel bar. The trap groaned, screamed, opened. The bear tore away, limping into the trees, blood trailing behind. Then Rory's light cut through the clearing. He wasn't far. He raised the rifle. Grace saw it. She didn't think. She dropped to one knee, grabbed a thick branch, and struck the side of a boulder with everything she had. The rock above them broke free. Not much, just enough. It fell with a thunderous crash between Rory's path and the clearing. Earth exploded upward. Mud, dust, bark. Rory shouted, cursed. The other men stumbled. Sentinel backed away, staggered slightly. He was limping. Grace saw it now. His shoulder, crushed inward slightly, blood soaking into the fur. He'd been caught before she arrived. Not fully, but enough. She moved toward him. He looked at her, eyes dark and swimming with pain, and then, for the first time, she reached out. Just enough to press her hand to his forearm. Warm, wet, alive. He didn't pull back, didn't speak, but his breathing steadied. The lights began to break through again. Grace grabbed the edge of his wrist, pulled him toward a narrow split between two outcroppings. They stumbled through. The wind howled louder here, rising between stone as if trying to hide their exit. They slipped into a hollow barely wide enough for both of them, and for a long minute, neither of them moved. His chest rose and fell. Her heart felt like it would break. Somewhere behind them, Rory cursed again. A gunshot cracked the night, but it was far and wild. Then silence. She exhaled, turned toward him. His head rested against the stone now, eyes half closed. He looked tired, but not afraid. She didn't speak, just stayed there beside him, watching the slow drip of blood from his fur. The night crawled on and the wind cooled the rocks. Far off, something snapped again. But this time, it wasn't a trap, just the sound of something breaking loose. And they stayed hidden, two shadows in the stone, breathing the same air, no longer strangers to fear or mercy. The storm didn't come with thunder this time, just wind, dry and steady, dragging dust through the lower basin, rattling the old bones of trees too tired to resist. It swept down through the Bitterroot like something ancient brushing its hand over the valley. That wind had a sound, low, steady, almost like breath. Grace leaned into it as she guided Sentinel through the dark. One arm wrapped around his waist, the other gripping his blood-slicked wrist. He wasn't walking so much as staggering, his feet dragging, the weight of him growing heavier with every step. His breath came in short, choked bursts, not from panic, but from pain, the kind that sat deep and didn't announce itself. She'd seen wounds like his before. Shoulder split near the joint, skin torn, muscle exposed just enough to make her heart catch. The steel jaws hadn't closed completely, but they'd crushed the meat under the fur. That much was clear. What amazed her more was how far he'd come on his own. They reached the old trapper's shelter just before midnight. It wasn't much. 3 walls and a rotted lean-to roof, half swallowed by ivy and years of snowmelt. But it was dry and hidden. Grace dropped to one knee and lowered him down onto the rough wooden planks. He didn't resist, just exhaled. She lit a small fire in the pit, low flame, little smoke. She boiled water in her dented canteen cup, the metal blackened from years of use. Her hands moved quickly, not because she was calm, but because she didn't have time to shake. The medical kit she kept tucked in her old rescue bag was outdated, but it would do. Gauze, thread, a bottle of iodine that still had half its sting. She peeled back the layers of matted fur with a pocket knife, rinsed the wound with warm water, then set to cleaning it. Sentinel grunted once, deep, low, like a cave exhaling. She didn't stop. "Almost done," she murmured, not expecting him to understand, but needing the words anyway. "This part's the worst." She pressed the cloth into the wound. He jolted, not from rage, but from reflex. His hand, massive, trembling, shot up and grabbed her wrist. Not tight, just enough to make her meet his eyes. And then he let go. She finished cleaning, then threaded the needle. It wasn't pretty. Her stitching was rough, uneven. But the bleeding slowed. She wrapped the whole shoulder in gauze, tying the bandage off with shaking fingers. She sat back, arms resting on her knees, staring at him. He'd closed his eyes now, his chest rising and falling with slow, shallow rhythm. And in that moment, with the fire casting soft gold light across the broken shelter, he didn't look monstrous. He looked tired, the kind of tired that didn't come from pain, but from carrying too much alone for too long. She whispered, "I used to be good at this, saving people. I worked mountain rescue, choppers, med kits, ropes. People would fall. I'd find them, bring them home." Her voice caught. "But the one that mattered most, I didn't get there in time." She didn't say his name. Didn't need to. The silence that followed stretched. Long enough for the fire to crack once. Long enough for the weight in her chest to settle in. Then Sentinel shifted. He didn't speak. He just moved one hand, slow, careful, and touched her wrist where his fingers had gripped her earlier. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't demand. It was presence. A quiet gesture that said he heard her. Not with ears. With memory. With something older. She stayed like that for a while. Listening to the wind pick up outside. Listening to his breathing. The night didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt held. She dozed off for a while, curled near the fire, her back to the entrance, her boots still on. When she woke, the flames had died down to glowing embers. He wasn't asleep anymore. He was gone. Her heart jumped. She sat up, hand reaching instinctively for the bag. But then she saw him. He was just outside, crouched near the edge of the clearing, gathering wood. His movement was slow, one hand favoring the other side. But he was upright, focused. She stepped outside, the cold biting her cheeks. The stars above were sharp, clear, millions of them cutting through the black. He turned as she approached. Didn't flinch. He handed her a bundle of sticks, neatly broken, dry, firewood. He'd gone to get it for her. She took it without speaking. Back at the fire pit, she re-stoked the flame. When she looked up, he was watching it. Not her. The flame. The movement of it. She wondered how many nights he'd spent watching from the trees, never close enough to touch it. The kind of light that humans had kept to themselves for centuries. And now here he was, borrowing it. She reached into her pack and pulled out an old tin she used for tea. Inside was a square of dark chocolate, wrapped in foil. She peeled it slowly, broke it in half, and held it out. He didn't take it, but he didn't back away. She set it on the flat stone beside him and stepped back. He stared at it a long while, then slowly picked it up. He sniffed it, turned it in his fingers, then placed it in his mouth. He chewed once, paused, chewed again. His eyes didn't change, but something in his posture did. His shoulders lowered, not from fatigue, from understanding. They sat like that, him watching the fire, her watching him, until the edge of dawn softened the sky into blue. When she woke again later, he was gone, but on the stone beside the fire, he'd left something behind. A piece of wood, no bigger than her palm, shaved smooth along one side. Carved into its surface were two intersecting lines. Simple, raw. Two paths crossing, then splitting again. She held it in her hand for a long time, feeling the weight of it. Not physical, but meaning. She didn't cry, but something inside her softened. She tucked the carving into her coat and stepped outside. The morning air smelled of pine and ash and something older. He wasn't in sight, but his presence lingered, like smoke, like memory, like borrowed fire, still burning. The wind turned sharp again as October closed its fist around the Bitterroot. The trees, once rich with summer's breath, now stood bare, bone-thin against a sky grayer than ash. Every step on the forest floor snapped dead pine needles. Grace felt it beneath her boots, like walking across a brittle truth waiting to break. The animals moved low now, quieter, like they knew something was coming before the people did. But people never listened to that kind of silence. A group of so-called researchers arrived that morning in a convoy of black trucks with satellite antennas and tinted windows, the kind that carried more ambition than science. They wore bright windbreakers, carried cases with labels that didn't belong in these woods. Thermal scopes, tranquilizer guns, drone kits. The trucks bore logos that read Montana Wildlife Survey Initiative, but nothing about them smelled like fieldwork. Grace watched from the station steps as Caldervoss shook hands with their lead. She caught his smile, too eager, too smooth. It curled something inside her gut. She turned away, but not before locking eyes with Rory Maddock, standing near the tailgate with his arms folded and a smirk spread wide across his unshaven face. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Back in the file room, she opened the metal drawer marked Old Logging and Habitat Clearances. It squealed loud enough to drown out the hum of conversation outside. She rifled through yellowed reports, water-stained ledgers, inspection logs, and then she saw it. Calder's name, an approval signature dated 12 years back, signed authorization for an experimental wildlife redirection program in the lower Larch Hollow area. Trap-based deterrence, steel jaw and sedative testing. Rationale: protect logging routes and accelerate tree harvest zones. Attached, incident report. A juvenile specimen, non-classified bipedal mammal, found deceased in spring runoff. Cause: trauma from steel device. Not reported to state authorities. Logged as animal of unknown origin. Disposed. Grace's breath stilled. Her fingers tightened on the paper. He knew. He always knew. She stepped out into the afternoon light, the folder tucked under her arm. The sky had begun to dim, clouds thickening toward the ridge like bruises. Across the clearing, the researchers had begun staging a grid. Poles with motion sensors, trap cages with sedative meat, nets rigged with weighted lines. It wasn't research. It was a hunt. That night she didn't go home. She followed them, quiet, off the main trail, long after they assumed the woods were empty. She watched as they set the bait along the creek, where Sentinel had once crouched to wash his wounds. She recognized the patterns, calculated, strategic. Every path, every blind turn. They knew what they were looking for, or at least they thought they did, and then they waited. It wasn't long. By midnight, motion alarms lit green on one of the cages. She watched them scramble, flashlights darting through the trees like fireflies on caffeine. Tranquilizer rifles raised, orders whispered with too much adrenaline to be steady. Then came the roar, not a scream, not a growl. A sound like boulders tearing down a mountainside. The cage door slammed open. Men yelled. One was thrown against a pine trunk and didn't move. Another fired. The dart hit something, but it didn't fall. It staggered, stumbled, then kept running. Grace's legs moved before her mind could stop them. She ran toward the sounds, branches whipping her face, boots thudding into mud. The lights danced wildly now, shouting rising from every direction. But her eyes found him in the chaos. Sentinel slumped forward, staggering through the bramble, a dart stuck deep into the side of his rib cage. His breath was ragged, limbs slower, every motion heavier than the last. She shouted his name, not out loud, just in her heart, the way you call someone when you don't have the right words but you need them to hear you anyway. Then she saw him collapse. She didn't think. She lit her flare. The sky lit orange. Smoke poured upward, a signal fire among shadows. The men turned, confused, distracted just long enough. Grace hurled another into the dry grass nearby. The wind did the rest. Flames crawled hungrily across the forest floor. The sedative bait sizzled in the heat. Traps snapped themselves shut, empty. The chaos cracked wide open. She reached him just as he tried to rise again, one arm buckled, his leg dragging. His eyes found her through the haze. Clouded, slower than before. She knelt, pulled his arm over her shoulder. "You're not dying in a cage," she said. The flames rose higher. Behind her, voices shouted. Orders barked. Someone screamed about fire protocols. Rory's voice cut through the chaos like rusted wire, panicked, raw. "Where the hell is Voss?" She didn't look back, but Rory did, and what he saw stopped him cold. Calder Voss stood frozen, rifle hanging limp in his hands, staring at the cage with the yellow spray paint mark on its roof. That mark, the one from the old clearance photos. The same system they used years ago to designate trap zones. Rory turned and looked at the equipment, then back at Voss, and suddenly he remembered. The yellow paint, the dead juvenile, the orders, the lie. He raised his rifle, not toward the creature, but toward Calder. "You lied to all of us," he said. Calder stepped back, palms up. "Put it down, Maddock." But Rory didn't move. "You knew what this was. You made us kill it once. I'm not doing it again." He didn't fire. But he didn't lower the weapon either. And in that moment, everything tilted. Grace dragged Sentinel toward the ridgeline, smoke curling behind them. The world burned around them, not with destruction, but with clarity. A reckoning. She reached the rock shelf where she'd first fallen months ago. Then, with the last strength in her arms, she sliced the cable holding the flare kit to the supply bag. It fell, ignited the dry bramble below. A fire line bloomed across the cliff's edge. Behind it, the hunters backed away, coughing, eyes wide. And beyond it, Sentinel stood, framed in smoke and rising flame, his breath shallow but steady, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't run, he didn't charge. He stood tall. Then slowly he nodded once. Not a farewell, a promise, and turned. He walked back into the dark, the fire closing behind him like a curtain. No roar, no war cry, just the sound of something leaving, not in defeat, but in mercy. And that was what broke them, because monsters don't show mercy, but maybe guardians do. The first snow came quiet. No wind, no warning. Just a slow hush descending from the clouds like a blanket pulled over the Bitterroot range after a long, fevered dream. The mountains looked softer now, edges dulled, trees frosted like they'd stood still just long enough to be forgiven. And in that stillness, Grace finally stopped running. Her suspension had come swiftly after the fire. Officially, it was for insubordination. Technically for obstruction of federal investigation, but no one really wanted a trial. Not after what Rory said. Not after the recordings leaked. The photographs, the cage with the yellow spray paint. The overlapping authorizations going back more than a decade. Calder Voss's name on all of them. Grace never saw him again. Word was he resigned. Disappeared east. No press, no apology. Rory gave a full statement. Told everything he knew. Even the parts that shamed him. He looked at me like I was the animal, he said to the journalist from Missoula. And I believed him. That line made the papers. It traveled further than Grace expected. But by the time the headlines faded, she was already gone. The cabin wasn't much. One room, no plumbing. Heat only from wood and time. It stood near the same hollow where she first left offerings months ago, where she nearly died. Where she was saved. The roof leaked when the wind came from the north. The porch creaked at night like something pacing just out of sight. But it was hers, and it was enough. Each morning she stepped into the snow with a jar of water and a folded piece of cotton soaked in salt. She left them at the edge of the trees, where the slope curved into the ravine. Always in the same spot. Always just enough. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, they disappeared before noon. Other times, she'd find something in their place. A smooth stone, a pine branch bent into a spiral. Once, a piece of bark, hollowed and filled with moss. Never loud, never close, but never far. She didn't chase it. Not anymore. Some things aren't meant to be claimed. She split her days between gathering firewood and watching the line of the tree line like a heartbeat. The forest had a rhythm again, slow and steady. Coyotes had returned. Deer left new prints by the creek. Even the birds sang again, not in panic, but in routine. When the first true snow stuck, 3 inches in the space of a morning, she knew winter had arrived for good. That night, she took her badge, the one she'd left once and received back, cleaned and carefully placed, and walked it into the woods. Her boots broke through a crust of ice, crunching over roots and fallen needles. She found the old cedar with the split trunk near the hollow and pressed the badge deep into the hollow. Fingers numb as they pushed past moss and memory. She whispered, "I won't need it anymore," then turned back without looking over her shoulder. The cabin was warm when she returned, the fire glowing soft inside the stone hearth. She sat by the window for a long time, knees drawn up, mug in hand. The world outside, white and breathless. She didn't expect anything. That's why, when the moment came, it felt like something out of dream. Just before dusk, she saw the shape. Far up on the ridge, standing against the falling snow. Not moving, not hiding, watching. "Sentinel!" His fur carried a dusting of snow, clinging to his shoulders and arms like frost over bark. He stood upright just as before, but something in his posture had shifted. Lighter, unburdened. He looked older, yes, but also calm, like something had closed. She didn't move. She only stepped onto the porch, one hand braced on the railing, the other curled loose at her side. And from across the clearing, he lifted one arm, pressed his palm to his chest, and nodded once. Not a farewell, not even a goodbye, a vow. Then he turned, and like breath into cold, he was gone. Grace stood there long after, the snow falling over her hair, onto her shoulders, her breath rising slow into the quiet. She didn't cry. There was nothing left to grieve, only to remember, and to carry forward. Because sometimes the most powerful bonds are not the ones shouted from mountaintops, but the ones that never needed words at all. Some truths aren't written in books or carved into stone. They're whispered through pine needles in the hush after a storm. They're carried in the warmth of a hand that reaches out when no one else will. In a world that too often fears what it doesn't understand, there are moments, quiet, fleeting, when something ancient and kind slips through the cracks of what we thought we knew. And it doesn't come roaring, it comes listening. This story was never about monsters. Not really. It was about the spaces between us, between people, between species, between sorrow and survival. It was about what happens when we choose to step toward instead of away, when we stop hunting and start seeing, not with fear, but with presence, with patience, with the courage to believe that even the wildest things can carry grace. Because mercy doesn't always look like light breaking through the trees. Sometimes it looks like walking away when you've been wronged. Sometimes it's a gift left in silence, a broken snare not reset, a promise honored not with words, but with absence. And sometimes that's enough. In the end, it's not about who's stronger or smarter or louder. It's about who's willing to see the soul in the shadow, about who still believes in the sacredness of life, even when it doesn't speak our language. And maybe that's what makes us human. Not our tools, not our laws, not the badges we wear, but our capacity to kneel beside what we don't understand and still offer help. To grieve what we once harmed. To carry that grief, not as guilt, but as a compass. We're all just trying to survive the wilderness in our own way. But sometimes, if we're lucky, something finds us out there, not to harm us, but to remind us we were never alone. Thank you for joining us tonight. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you feel, wonder, reflect, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share what stayed with you. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive and this strange, beautiful conversation going. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep listening to the quiet. There's more out there than you think.